that's the point. Can't really expect that to work, can I? You can tell I spent most of the last year running a business and not using a computer if I thought that was going to work. Click, there we are. And here's an example of the wonderfully named kegger face that you can use to control your brewery from your Raspberry Pi. We can't drink beer all the time. Sometimes we have to drink coffee. A lot of the uses of Raspberry Pi that we hadn't anticipated are these kind of automation uses. These people like us, adults who already know about computers, using the Raspberry Pi as a cheap way of automating something in the world. This is a coffee machine, this is in our office in Cambridge. This coffee machine was mailed to us by a firm in the US who've arranged that. We've arranged it every time you text a particular number, this thing's plumbed into SMS. Every time you text a particular number, it makes you a coffee. It doesn't check to see whether there's a mug under the coffee machine though, so that's caused a few issues. It's also kind of annoying for the guy in the office who we've associated it with, because he just keeps receiving these one-word SMSs that just say coffee. Retro games. So one of the things that we thought when we were developing the Pi, one of the things that was important to us, is we had to remember that when I bought my machine to program on, but when most people bought their computers back in the 1980s, they weren't necessarily buying them in order to program on. They were buying them for some other reason. They were buying them because they were interesting machines. They just happened to have this property that they were programmable. So when we were designing the Pi, we tried very hard to choose components which would make it interesting. And one of the these kind of hooks that will get the Pi into a child's life, in the hope that once it's in their life, if it's in their life and it's chock full of programming tools, maybe they'll think about doing some programming. One of the things we did with the Pi, the SoC choice, we picked an SoC, an ARM-based SoC, which had a very large amount of multimedia performance. We wanted to have a device that you could have in your room and play games on. We wanted to have a device you could have in your room and play videos on. So what we've ended up with, by chance, is a device that people use for doing a lot of retro gaming. It's also a device that people use for a lot of, people run Xbox Media Center on. We never imagined that there was going to be a genuine consumer application for the Pi. I believe after the PC, we're the largest. We've overtaken jailbroken Apple TVs as the largest non-PC Xbox Media Center platform. That was a real surprise to us. Retro computers, powerful enough to emulate a lot of computers. This is a Mac, and it is really that big. This was from last week. So that's running a classic Mac. That's running a classic Mac simulator under Linux on this tiny little screen we've got. Weather stations. This is a great example of young people doing cool stuff with the Pi. This is a couple of students at Westminster School in London. They developed an air quality monitoring weather station which they've called AirPi. I think they've just done an Indiegogo for this, and they've just been overfunded by about 400%. The idea is they're going to try and deploy these things. They're going to try and deploy these things all over the world. They're going to try and deploy them in cities in Africa in particular. Art is another community of people who we didn't realise were going to use the Pi. This is just up the road in Canada Water. This is one of the docks on the side of the Thames, and these are these little plastic. They're little kind of paper boats made out of plastic that all light up, and you text them from the train. So again, an example of, I guess, connecting the physical world to the network using Raspberry Pi. This is one we do a lot of. I'm not sure if any of you have seen any of our high altitude ballooning footage. This is a big balloon full of hydrogen, and the thing that my friend Dave is holding in his hand there is a contraption with a couple of Raspberry Pis and some cameras, and he's going to send that up to 40 kilometers. That's a close-up view of what Dave was holding in his hand. This is Babbage the Bear on an ultimately unsuccessful mission to beat Felix Baumgartner's 38.9 and importantly 38.9 kilometer jump. This one was ultimately unsuccessful. This was on Bank Holiday Saturday. Push this across here. Unfortunately, on that occasion, I think Babbage decided he wasn't going to step off the capsule. We recovered him from a field, still desperately clinging onto his launch capsule. So we sent him up again 2 days later. He didn't get away with it. and this time we gave him a harder kick to get him off the platform. So that triggered that was GPS triggered at 39 kilometers. So we beat Felix Baumgartner by I think a total of 31 meters. There was a lot of noise in the Austrian press about this. There were a number of people in the Austrian press who suggested that it was that this was a fake. I think there's a little bit of sour grapes there. So we've ended up inviting a couple of Austrian journalists along if they'd like to maybe come and see our next bear drop. So that's a cute one. What else have we got? That's another shot. That's another one of Dave's shots. For those of you in the UK, that's Cornwall. So that's Devon and Cornwall. That's Dorset and Devon and Cornwall from about 40 kilometres up looking west. Really very cute. He does these on a regular basis. And the wonderful thing about this for us is, while we started doing Raspberry Pi in the hopes that we were going to get more children interested in computer programming, we had a very narrow, selfish focus. What we've ended up seeing is that platforms like Raspberry Pi are fantastic for getting children involved in all sorts of STEM subjects. They're fantastic for getting children involved in and excited about science, technology, engineering, mathematics, all of those things. The total budget to do one of these shots is about £200 or £300. So this puts the space program, this might as well be in space, right? It's a good hard vacuum up there. It puts the space program within reach of every primary school in the country. And that's kind of cool. And maybe I'm a 1980s space cadet, but I really defy children not to be excited about science if they can have their own space program. I just don't believe that can possibly happen. There's Space Moon. We have a camera module. So we spent a lot of time working on, as I said, we spent a lot of last year just working on getting Raspberry Pis available to people in significant volume. And that really stopped us from doing any peripherals of our own. One of the nice things this year is we've been able to get our first peripheral for the Raspberry Pi, our first party peripheral. And that's a 5 megapixel still camera that people have been using to take pictures of stuff. The nice thing here, this is astrophotography using the Pi. So someone made a really nice shim for attaching the Pi camera module to a really nice high quality telescope. And by doing a process of kind of stacking, what you can do is you can take a lot of exposures and stack them up. You can get really, really nice high quality images. So I think I had an example here. This may not be the most successful video, so watch carefully. That's Saturn. That's a reasonable image of Saturn taken using a Raspberry Pi. Back in. We had a real focus on the UK. We were really mostly interested in the UK when we started doing this project. It's been a real surprise to us. About 80% of Raspberry Pis now sell outside the UK. We sell a lot in the United States. This is a chap called Matt Richardson, who any of you have been involved in sort of maker faire type things, O'Reilly type things might know. He's been building Raspberry Pi projects since very, very early on. I particularly like this one as a cyclist. I particularly enjoyed this one. It's an incredibly distracting head-up display that tells you how fast you're cycling here with a number that's in the beam of your headlamp. A lot of people have been interested in Pi and Bitcoin. The Raspberry Pi is a really lousy platform for Bitcoin mining on. One of the interesting things about the Raspberry Pi, people often think, well, I could buy a lot of Raspberry Pis and I could put them together. Now I get a really powerful, really cheap machine. Actually, the Raspberry Pi is not a very good source of cheap MIPS. What it is it's a very cheap computer. So it's if what you want is a lot of MIPS, you're better off building your machines out, building your supercomputer or your Bitcoin miner out of white box PCs. What it is very good at is this sort of thing, which is controlling other things. So now that Bitcoins have got so hard to find that you really have to use ASICs, you really have to use USB ASICs to mine them. A lot of people have been using Raspberry Pis as a control platform for these little dinky dongles, which cost hundreds of dollars each. Because we have one of the interesting things about the Pi is we have a fairly low performance CPU. but we have a very, very high performance GPU, so we have very high performance graphics on the device. So one of the things we've been doing over the last year is to try to bring some of that high performance graphics capability to bear on the user experience. So one of the things we've been keenest on is we're working with our friends at Collabora to try to get Wayland working on the Pi. Now it turns out that Wayland is the putative next generation Linux desktop environment for a Linux desktop compositing system. It turns out to be an extremely good match for some of the compositing hardware that we have on the Pi. So at present, this is X11 on the Pi. I sort of feel that's maybe a slide, I'm not sure what they did to it to make it work that badly. But certainly, X11 performance on the Pi, because you're using this ARM11 processor to move every single pixel around, is not a particularly compelling experience. One of the nice things about Wayland is that Wayland allows you to offload all of the vast majority of that kind of very quotidian composition work onto dedicated composition hardware. So here we have an example of broadly the same thing running. This is exactly the same hardware, but this time rendering its desktop using Wayland and Western instead of using software X11. You see we have the nice shiny, we have the smooth window dragging, and we have the nice shiny fade out effects. In a moment I think we may have, yes, we have non-rectangular windows. An animation. More of these, and then these kind of really nice Mac-like desktop effects. These really nice. What we would like to do is we would like to make the Pi usable as a general-purpose computer. We really do believe that even the current generation of Pi hardware, if you do enough of this kind of hacking, is suitable as a general-purpose PC, as a general-purpose desktop computer. And really, a lot of the work we're doing. A lot of people ask us, when are you going to do a Raspberry Pi 2? And the answer is, we're not going to do a Raspberry Pi 2 while we feel that we can screw more performance out of the Raspberry Pi 1 using clever software. Raspberry Pi 2 is very tempting. We're really reluctant. We've sold 1.5 million Pis. We're extremely reluctant to orphan 1.5 million people. We don't want to abandon 1.5 million people and go chasing off after the next fast chipset. So this sort of thing is increasingly important to us. I said we had a camera board. People have been doing, I showed you an example of some photographing some very large things with the camera board. Here's an example of the opposite thing. Here's an example of someone who's made a mounting for connecting their Raspberry Pi camera board to a microscope. People do other photography stuff with the Pi as well. This is a gigapixel camera. This is using a DSLR and a programmable mount to build a gigapixel camera using the Pi and off-the-shelf hardware. I chose 1A. I chose to put 1A in Khan on this occasion. Khan Academy is a really wonderful platform. A lot of these MOOC platforms, absolutely fantastic for teaching people stuff. The problem is that they tend to rely on having a fast connection to a data center on the west coast of the United States to pull down your video content. A really nice thing that people have been doing in the developing world with Raspberry Pi is to take some of those platforms, in particular Khan Academy, and bundle all of the video content onto a high-capacity SD card, and then deliver Khan Academy-like video content via SneakerNet to Africa. You take these things out to a village in Africa, glue these up on a wall somewhere, and then connect cheap commodity Chinese Android tablets to via Wi-Fi, and thereby bypassing the lack of backhaul back to the West. A wonderful group of people we know in the Netherlands came up with the idea of doing Raspberry Pi co-location. I think they were a little bit surprised when they got 2,000 Raspberry Pis in the mail. I think they have now stopped doing it for free after they started to burn through racks on a regular basis. You can see they can get quite high density, but even this is going to burn racks fairly fast. So, yeah, I think there are about 1,500 co-located Raspberry Pis at their data center at the moment. Yes, it'll run Minecraft. This is another example of making it interesting to kids. If you want it to be interesting to kids, it's got to run the things that kids find interesting. We have these things called Raspberry Jams. Raspberry Jams are these kind of user groups which sprung up completely independently of us. It's wonderful that they're completely independent of us because it means that we don't have to expend any time or mental energy running them. There's some way, as I said, engineers right now. At the moment, a lot of children and Raspberry Pis is about engineers taking the opportunity to share what they find interesting with their kids. So yeah, Mikey's dad's an engineer. Girls, this is a project that we're supporting on the website at the moment to build computer labs in Afghanistan, for teaching girls to program in Afghanistan. And as I said, we were very focused on the UK, and yet we found that Raspberry Pis are really cropping up pretty much everywhere in the world. It's really, really satisfying for us. And personally satisfying, like everyone else, when we started building the Raspberry Pi, we asked ourselves, we want to build some cheap hardware. Where do you build cheap hardware? We build cheap hardware in China. The really wonderful realization for us towards the end of last year was that we could build Raspberry Pi, the cheapest computer in the world. We could build it in Wales. I'm Welsh, so I'm half Welsh. Since the last rugby, I'm fully Welsh. We discovered that we could build it just up the road from where I was born in Wales for the same price as we could build it in China. We're employing about 50 people in Bridgend. Sony, you can see here there's a Sony logo. It's actually built for us under contract by Sony in South Wales to incredible standard. So I think that's all I've got. Cool, I ran